Welcome back to Island of Stories, where every tale brings you closer to the heart of human experiences and the extraordinary things people do when faced with life's challenges. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe and join our community, because here, every story matters. This story begins on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday afternoon for Michael, a single dad who had been juggling the endless responsibilities of raising his daughter, working long hours, and still finding time to take her out for little father-daughter dates whenever he could. His daughter, Lily, was 10 years old, bright, full of questions, and the light of his life. That day, he decided to take her to a cozy little diner on the edge of town. Neither of them could have known that this simple outing would turn into something unforgettable, something that revealed not only Michael's sharp instincts but also his unshakable sense of right and wrong. The diner smelled of fresh coffee and pancakes, and Lily immediately asked for extra syrup. Michael laughed, trying to shake off the fatigue from his long week, happy just to see her smile. But while Lily was busy coloring on the paper menu with the crayons the waitress had given her, Michael's eyes kept drifting toward that same waitress. Something about her behavior didn't feel right. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, with dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail and a smile that seemed a little too forced. At first, he thought maybe she was just tired from a long shift. After all, he knew what exhaustion looked like. But then he started noticing little details. 5, to be exact. 5 subtle signs that made it clear to him that she wasn't just tired. She was uncomfortable, and worse, she was being harassed. The first sign came when she walked to the booth behind theirs to serve another customer. Michael noticed her shoulders stiffen as if she was bracing herself. Her smile faltered when the man at the table said something low to her, something Michael couldn't hear but could guess wasn't polite. She laughed nervously, but her body leaned ever so slightly away from the man. Michael recognized that kind of laugh. It wasn't real. It was the laugh people use when they're trying to keep a situation from escalating. The second sign was in her eyes. Every time she approached that table, she avoided direct contact with the man, keeping her gaze low, almost as though she were trying not to invite further comments. But whenever she turned away, Michael caught the quick flash of discomfort, almost fear, in her expression. The third sign came when she accidentally dropped a fork near the man's feet. As she bent down to pick it up, Michael noticed her flinch sharply when the man shifted in his seat. It was subtle, but telling. She moved quickly, keeping her distance as she stood up again. By now, Michael was paying full attention, his instincts as a protective father and as someone who had lived through enough hardship himself kicking in. The fourth sign was in her hands. When she brought drinks to the man's table, her fingers trembled ever so slightly. She gripped the tray tightly, almost as if she were grounding herself, willing herself not to lose control. Michael had seen hands shake like that before, his own, years ago, during some of the hardest nights of his life. And then came the fifth sign, the one that made Michael's heart pound with anger. As she tried to back away after setting down the food, the man reached out and brushed his fingers against her arm, too casually to be an accident but too deliberately to ignore. The waitress froze for just a fraction of a second, then forced another one of those nervous smiles before scurrying back toward the counter. Michael clenched his jaw. He knew that look. He knew that feeling. And in that moment, he decided he couldn't stay silent. Not when someone was clearly being harassed right in front of him. But here's the thing about Michael. He wasn't the type to explode in anger or make a scene without thinking things through. He had Lily sitting right across from him, and he needed to protect her too. He couldn't risk her being frightened or traumatized. So, he had to be smart. He called the waitress over with a warm smile, as though he hadn't noticed anything unusual. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Could we get a couple extra napkins?" She nodded, her smile still polite but her eyes darting nervously back toward that booth. Michael leaned forward slightly and spoke in a low voice. "Are you okay?" Her eyes widened just a little, and she hesitated before answering. "I'm fine," she whispered quickly, but the way she said it only confirmed to Michael that she wasn't fine at all. He didn't push further right then. He knew she was scared. Instead, he gave her a reassuring look and said softly, "If you need help, just let me know." When she walked away, Lily tilted her head. "Daddy, is something wrong?" Michael gave her hand a squeeze. "Don't worry, sweetheart, just keep coloring, okay?" Meanwhile, he kept his eyes on the man in the booth. The guy was in his 40s, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit, his tie loosened, and a smug grin plastered across his face as though he owned the place. Every time the waitress passed, his eyes followed her in a way that made Michael's stomach churn. Michael decided he needed to act, but carefully. He stood up casually, telling Lily he was going to stretch his legs, and walked over to the counter. He asked for the manager. A middle-aged woman with tired eyes but a sharp presence stepped out. Michael introduced himself quickly and explained what he'd noticed, pointing discreetly toward the booth. The manager's expression darkened immediately. "You're not the first to mention something about him," she whispered. "We've had complaints before, but he's slippery. He tips well and tries to charm his way out of everything." Michael frowned. "Well, he's making your staff uncomfortable. That young woman doesn't deserve this." The manager nodded. "You're right. Thank you for saying something." As the manager walked away to handle the situation, Michael returned to his seat, trying to act normal for Lily's sake. A few minutes later, he watched as the manager approached the man's booth. Their conversation was tense but quiet. The man looked annoyed, leaning back in his seat with a smirk that made Michael's blood boil. But then, suddenly, his smirk faded as the manager firmly told him something that clearly left no room for argument. The man grumbled, threw some cash on the table, and stood up. For a moment, Michael thought the man might try to cause a scene, but when their eyes met across the diner, something in Michael's steady, unwavering gaze must have warned him off. The man turned and left without another word. The waitress exhaled, relief flooding her face. She caught Michael's eye from across the room and mouthed two simple words, "Thank you." When she came over a little later to refill their drinks, her smile was more genuine this time. "I really appreciate what you did," she whispered. "Most people just look away." Michael shook his head. "No one deserves to feel unsafe at work. You don't have to go through that alone." She nodded, her eyes misty for just a moment before she composed herself and walked away to help another table. Lily looked up at her dad with curiosity. "Daddy, what happened?" Michael thought carefully about how to answer. "Sometimes," he said gently, "people do things that aren't kind, and it makes others feel uncomfortable or scared. When that happens, it's important to stand up for them, even if it's not easy." Lily smiled softly, seeming to understand. "Like you did for her?" Michael nodded. "Exactly." The rest of their meal was quiet, but filled with an unspoken warmth. Michael knew that he hadn't just taught his daughter about courage and compassion, he had shown her. When they finally left the diner, the cool evening air wrapped around them. Michael held Lily's hand a little tighter, grateful for the reminder that doing the right thing doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes, it's simply refusing to stay silent when someone else needs you to speak up. And that, dear friends, is the story of how one single dad noticed 5 subtle signs that a waitress was being harassed, and chose to act, not with anger or violence but with quiet strength and compassion. Because in the end, being a hero doesn't always mean charging into danger. Sometimes, it means noticing the small things, paying attention when others look away, and showing kindness when it matters most. Thank you for watching Island of Stories. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep bringing you more stories that inspire, move, and remind us of the power of simple human decency. Until next time, take care, and remember, every small act of courage can change someone's world.